Hi, my name is Larry Walters, and I'm here today to introduce you to the Land-Based Finance training module on betterment charges. What we will cover in this session today includes betterment levies, special assessments, how they work, how they differ. We'll talk about two cases, and the intent here is to set up a discussion that you will have within your groups on these two cases. And then you'll come back together, compare notes, and decide both what was strong and weak in these cases and what you might do if you wanted to use betterment charges, betterment levies in your particular context. What would the essential tasks and functions be that need to be carried out? So let's get started. Our objectives today is to simply recognize that betterment charges and special assessments are an important source of revenue for infrastructure funding in many parts of the world. And we also want to be able to articulate the key tasks that have to be performed in order to effectively administer either betterment charges or special assessments. So we both want to understand how they work, and we want to understand what it takes to make them work. So let's be clear, first of all, what we're talking about. We're talking about charges that are assessed in connection with public infrastructure improvements. By and large, they are limited to the recovery of the actual costs incurred. They're assessed once, and the two tools that we're talking about, betterment levies and special assessments, differ in that betterment levies are collected as a one-time charge. Special assessments are also collected, but over a period of time, and very often they're added to the annual recurring tax on property. Okay? The initial incidence in both cases is on existing landholders whose land benefits from the improvements being carried out. There are a whole range of improvements or activities that public can undertake that affects private land values. In the little news clip that I put on this slide, you can see that in India, here's a case where simply regularizing title to land increases the value of that land, and the local government is saying, well, we created the value by increasing or by approving the change in land title status, so we're going to put a small tax on that. More commonly, these charges apply to infrastructure investment. We're going to put in road improvements. We're going to put in a new water system. We're going to put in street lighting. We're going to do something that benefits a specific set of properties in very identifiable ways and enhances their value. The purpose of these levies, whether they be called levies or charges or taxes, and all of those terms are used, is intended to allow the community to share in the increase in that private land value that results from the public investment as a way of funding the investment itself. Betterment charges differ from developer charges, we're going to talk about a little bit later, in that they are applied usually to existing landowners rather than the developers or redevelopers of an area. But they're similar to developer charges in that they're usually a one-time charge, and they're tied to a specific event that influences the value of land. So what are the minimum requirements to make this work? First, there has to be an appropriate legal framework. The law has to be clear that it is appropriate for a government to identify land values that are affected by a particular investment and to recover the cost of that investment from those landholders. That means we then also have to be able to identify all of the land plots whose value will be affected by the improvements. Then we have to be able to estimate the impact on the land value of those plots. We have to have an accurate estimate of the cost of the improvements that will be put in place. We have to have a method for allocating the improvement costs to the individual plots of land based on the share of the value or the benefit that they will receive. And then in the case of betterment charges, we have to have an adequate one-time billing and collection system. So the law has to allow it. We have to be able to identify which plots of lands are affected, because not all may be affected. Some instances it may be that the whole community is affected. More commonly, it will be specific neighborhoods, maybe even very small sections that will be affected. We have to identify which of the plots are affected. We have to estimate the impact on the value of those properties. We have to estimate the cost of the improvements pretty accurately, because we have to allocate that cost to the property owners in proportion to the benefits that they receive or the changes that they receive in their land values. And then we need the billing and collection system to work appropriately. Special assessments are very similar, except on that last step. We have to do exactly the same things in terms of having an appropriate framework, being able to identify the affected plots, estimating the impact on value, accurately estimating the cost of the improvements, allocating it to the land. But now we get to the difference. The special assessment says, rather than a one-time charge, we're going to make it more bearable for the landowners and collect those charges over a period of time. Maybe 5 years, maybe 7 years, maybe 10 years, but over a period of time in annual or semi-annual or quarterly fees, whatever is deemed appropriate, which means that we need also then a billing and collection system which can track who's paid and who hasn't, and we can do that over time. Finally, in the case of special assessments, it is most commonly the case that these are used only after you have the agreement of a majority of the landowners. Now, what that majority is varies from country to country. It may be 50% plus one. It may be a larger majority, maybe 60% or 70%. It may be based upon the number of landowners, or it may be based on the land area that is held. It doesn't have to be everyone, but there's generally, these work better if you have a majority of the landowners supporting the project. Okay? So here's an example. On this chart I've given you, the green line represents a road improvement that we're going to put in. The darker brown areas are immediately adjacent to it. They're the ones that are going to benefit most directly from this. And they see the largest increases in the land value because they have such improved access from this road improvement. A little further away, they'll also see some increased land value because of enhanced access, but it won't be to the same extent as those that are immediately adjacent to the road. And once you get more than a block or two away from the road, it's not going to make much difference in land value. And so we would estimate the cost of the road improvement. We would allocate that to these landowners based upon the proportion of the total value that they receive from the benefits of the road enhancement. Okay? Larger lots are going to bear more of the cost. Further away, they're going to bear less of the cost. This is how the technique works in principle. Okay? So when you do this, you have to think about the potential impacts. The first is, what's the net revenue impact? Well, it's very nearly always zero, because this is a cost recovery instrument. We're trying to recover the cost of a specific investment. We've estimated as accurately as we can what that investment is, and now we've allocated those costs to landowners in an effort to cover the costs. There may be some additional costs incurred if you're using the special assessment and collecting it over a period of time, but you need the money up front in order to put the infrastructure in place. There may be some borrowing costs or some administrative costs associated with it as well. But by and large, the net revenue effect of this tool is nearly always zero. We also have to worry about the incentives for private investment. And the reality is the incentives are often very positive. There are a number of instances that you can find around the world where the business community has stepped forward and said, we want to pay more tax because we want the money to go to fix this intersection or improve the security in this area or the lighting in this area or the access to our businesses. And if you'll make the public investment, then you should tax us, just us, the business landowners that benefit, more heavily to pay for that investment. Very often it's the business community that will be most interested in having this kind of a tool available so that they can get the infrastructure improvements that they need and get them paid for in a fair and equitable way. You also have to think about the social impacts. And these have to be weighed carefully, because as you put in improvements that increase the value of land, you do run the risk of pushing poorer people off that land and out of that community or that neighborhood because they can no longer afford to live there. So that has to be weighed carefully. But there are ways that that can be addressed, and it's been addressed in India and a variety of places around the country where some share of the improvement actually goes for social housing to make it possible for people to stay in those neighborhoods. Okay? Finally, there's a tremendous potential impact for spatial and planning. This is a great way to fund planned improvements in neighborhoods. Now, in the cases that we're going to talk about, let's talk, the first case is the Betterment Levies as they're applied in Medellin, Colombia. Medellin has been doing this for a long, long time. They first started using this tool in the 1920s. About 60% of their road system in Medellin has been funded using this particular tool. And they do it, the way they've done this in the past is, again, they lay out the improvements that are required, they identify who the landowners are, they assess the landowners based upon the percentage of the increased value that they're going to see, and they collect that money. In the case of Medellin, they do it as a one-time charge. It's been extremely successful for them over the years. Okay. The second case we're going to talk about today is Cuenca, Ecuador. And this is a very different kind of scenario. It's also, here that we're using a special assessment, it's still a form of a betterment charge, but again, the difference with the special assessment is we're going to collect that money over a period of time. In the case of Cuenca, Ecuador, they collect it over, I believe it's a 7-year period of time. One of the fundamental differences, and one of the reasons I really like this case, is this is a case where neighborhoods can come forward and propose projects. Say, these are the improvements we'd like to have in our neighborhood, and the city evaluates them for their technical feasibility, prioritizes them, but everybody knows in the discussion that if the project is approved, the property taxes are going to go up in that neighborhood until that project is paid for. It's been extremely successful. Okay? You'll see in the case what the statistics are for what the repayment rate is and how early people pay their taxes back, but it's been extremely successful in bringing about and funding local improvements in the community. Questions you should consider as you think about these and talk about these cases in your groups. Okay? First, what went well in the case? What did you find intriguing or really interesting about this case? What did you see that you thought was problematic or that could have been done better? Were there things that you thought, well, if we had made a few administrative changes, that might have worked a little bit better? Importantly, one of the questions is, how unique are the situations in Medellin or Cuenca, and therefore how portable are those ideas to other settings around the world, particularly your own? Okay? And then the question of, what does it really take to do this? What are the tasks and the functions that have to be carried out in order to use this tool effectively? And be as concrete and as specific as you can in identifying those lists. Because one of the things that you're going to think about next then is to say, all right, if we wanted to do this in our home community, what would it take? Would it be the same list of tasks and functions? Would they be carried out by the same agencies? Do we have the capacity to do those things? But right now, all you're focused on is identifying what happened in Colombia, what happened in Ecuador, and what did it take there to make it work? When you get done with a small group discussion, then you'll come back, and that's when we'll start saying, okay, what are the essential tasks and functions that are necessary for special assessments or betterment charges? And how are these functions organized and administered in our community right now? Maybe we are doing them, but maybe we're not doing them as well as we might. Maybe some of them we don't do at all or don't have the capacity to do. That's what you want to be able to identify as you think about the potential of this kind of an instrument for your context, to identify what's essential and then identify in your own context, where do those capacities exist now? How well are they being used? What do we have to develop if we wanted to do this? Thank you. Enjoy your conversation.